Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Sense. I'm Joe Grabowski, the VP for Evangelization here at the Society of G.K. Chesterton. And this is our weekly podcast for February 24th of 2026. As many of you who are longtime viewers, listeners to the show know, I am located in the outskirts of Philadelphia. And so we're presently digging our way out of this little nor'easter snowstorm blizzard, I suppose it was officially designated, that rolled through. Not quite as bad as the previous snowstorm that I mentioned on this podcast back on Groundhog's Day. You can check out that show in the show notes if you're interested in listening to it. I reflected then on snowfall and kind of what it means, and I think that is on my mind again this morning. It was very nice going outside and looking around at the snow. Very pretty aspect to the street, and I thought how enjoyable this would be if only we could simply enjoy it, if we didn't have to view it as a nuisance rather than as a treat. And it reminded me of the great saying of G.K. Chesterton that an adventure is only an inconvenience rightly considered. Um, that, when we think of things as inconveniences, we simply need to change our perspective and see in them an adventure instead. And looking out my window at the snow outside, and I'll try to put a visual of this on the video so you can see the beautiful view from my front porch. And yet, of course, I snapped that picture between people heaving piles of snow as they shoveled their cars out and everything. And so there was this bit of a contrast between the natural beauty that lay over the world in the wake of this snowstorm and people struggling to cope with the snow rather than just romp around in it and make snow angels, which maybe we should be doing, but unfortunately, that's not our lot. I do hope that the kids enjoyed the snow day today that they inevitably got. And I hope that we all find time to, whether it's with a snowstorm or anything else, especially during this season of Lent, uh, find some inconveniences in our lives that maybe we could properly, rightly consider turning them into adventures for ourselves. That, however, is not what I want to talk about on this quick episode today. What I want to talk about is America, our wonderful nation. Of course, like I'm sure many of you, am still celebrating somewhat the victory of the United States hockey team in the finals for the gold medal at the Olympics over Canada. I saw some interesting news articles about it, likening it to the experience of the so-called Miracle on Ice game. Uh, I suppose I don't want to press that metaphor too hard about whether or not we were playing against Soviet-like forces once again. No, all due love and respect to our lovely neighbors to the north, and better luck next time. Hopefully, we can be magnanimous in victory. But it is nice to see. It was a fun game. On that subject of being magnanimous in victory, that is what I want to speak about uh, today, because we are in the midst of what is a special year here in America. It is the semiquincentennial. Try saying that 5 times fast. The semiquincentennial of the birth of the United States of America, 1776. So this is the 250th anniversary since a bunch of patriots, gentlemen farmers, and scholars decided that they were going to rebel against King George and the Parliament of England and declare themselves as free and independent states in an act, some would say, of wonderful bravery and, inaugurating much of the modern world of liberty that we take for granted. Critics might say an act of treason. The point is that even right there, just to speak about what exactly it was when those gentlemen signed the Declaration of Independence, that these United States are and ought to be by right independent states, right? uh, what exactly was the nature of that act? Was it a justified act? Was it justified to go to war over? Um, we're uncomfortable with this question, especially as we feel probably an element of patriotism uh, coming in. For those of you who aren't citizens here in the United States, I'm sure that there's something similar that you could relate to within your own national history. Chesterton once famously remarked that saying my country, right or wrong, is like saying my mother, drunk or sober. And I think that that's one of his more mystifying quotes to a lot of people. But what he's basically getting at there is that if you love your country, that can sometimes necessitate criticizing your country because you want your country at its best. You don't want your country at its worst. And every country does have its low points. It's times when it might not be living up to the wonderful vocation of a people that it might have. And as it is with all of us in our own individual lives, as it is for all of us that are brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, aunts, uncles, or mothers and fathers. So, my mother, drunk or sober, is not something that any loving child would say. The loving child would want his mother at her best. And we all want our motherland at her best. And that's kind of the point that he was getting at in that adage. This is all on my mind because of the semi-quincentennial of the country, and in honor of which we have published this brand new book from ACS Books. Well, it's not a brand new book, but it's a brand new publication of an old book. This is Chesterton's What I Saw in America from 1921. And this is recounting the trip that he took in America at the beginning of that decade and what he saw, where he said that he would not be going back. And excuse me, this was published in I believe 1922, but he visited America in 1921, and he said that he would not be writing a book about his travels, and he quickly broke that promise when he got back. But as with all Chesterton things, it's not what you would expect. It's not a travelogue. It is not Chesterton simply recounting literally what he saw in America. It's almost like I don't know that he intended this in the title of the book, but there's almost sort of a double entendre in the meaning of that title. When we maybe have a friend who is starting a new relationship or dating, starting to see someone, we might ask him or her, "What do you see in that person?" And this is, as it were, if you went to Mr. Chesterton and said, "What do you see in America?" This is what he sees in America. In other words, it's an insight about the soul of the nation. It's an insight about really what America is. This is the book, incidentally, that contains probably the most famous quote from Chesterton about America, that America is the only country founded upon a creed, and that the nation has the soul of a church. But he doesn't mean that necessarily in a wholly uh, positive way, a wholly praising way. This is a book that presents, I think, a nice challenge, and it's a great challenge for us to consider here, those of us who are Americans in this 250th year of our nation, to take a look at what a more or less objective outsider, but an outsider who also was committed to uh, the teachings of small o Orthodox Christianity at this time, 1921. He would become Catholic in 1922, of course, and he was probably already intellectually convinced of pretty much all of the truths that the Catholic Church upholds and teaches. And so he's bringing that ethic, he's bringing that kind of perspective to bear upon both the history of the United States of America and also the present, at the time, present situation of the United States of America, a lot of which rings true today in the present situation of the United States of America. Not a whole lot changes. There's nothing new under the sun, right? Um, and so he looks at the kind of conflicts of interest or differences of value between, say, the more rural parts, the small town communities in the country, and the major megalopolises, the big cities, and their factories, and the industrial hubs, um, kind of encroaching upon everything. He has a lot to say about all of those things. And so I do encourage you to head over to our website. You can get this at chesterton.org/store. That's chesterton.org/store. We're selling it for the wonderful Patriotic price of $17.76. Had a little fun with the pricing on this one. So you can, of course, if you're a member, you get a discount, and that kind of ruins the poetry of that. But you get your member discount if you want to purchase this from our store. I do recommend it. Just a little bit more about the volume. It has commentary essays written by each of that wonderful group of men we call the troubadours. For those of you who aren't familiar, the troubadours is a group of friends who have kind of had an online summit going on basically monthly since really the start of um, a certain widespread illness that shall not be named, lest this video cease to appear in search results. But at the height of that, they decided to get together on Zoom and broadcast their conversations, and it really took off. And that is Dale Ahlquist, Dan Kerr, Joseph Pierce, William Fahey, and Christopher Check. And so each of those guys and those who have watched this podcast for a while will recognize some of their names as past interviewees here on the podcast. Each of them introduces a series of chapters here in the book with some commentary. There's also some annotations in here, an introduction by, of course, our own Dale Ahlquist, and then some supplemental material, some other things that Chesterton had to say about America in other places, not just from this book, but different things that he said in the three sections at the end of the book, what he said about America before he came, what he said during his visit, and then what he said after his visit in other places. And so it's really a nice enrichment volume, even if you have an old copy, a trade paperback or something, or a Kindle version in your library already. This is a good one to have because of the extra material therein. I will be trying to bring the troubadours on in series onto this channel to interview them throughout the year because we're going to be focusing on this 250th anniversary. There's a lot that Chesterton has to say about America, but also just about the nature of national identity and nationhood as such that I think are very, very poignant and pertinent for us to consider here in this moment in 2026. And so uh, please make sure you're subscribed, hit the bell to get notifications, and we'll be having the troubadours on I hope to have the troubadours come on each in turn and talk about their contribution to this book, what they thought about the book as a whole, about their particular chapters, and also just to find out what they're up to. To conclude today, though, I wanted to share just a glimpse of sort of some of the other things that Chesterton has to say about um, these issues of patriotism, of what it means to be a nation. Uh, we'll be probably visiting a lot of these kinds of essays, and it's a very consistent thread of Chesterton's thinking throughout his entire career, remarkably so. For those unfamiliar with Chesterton, you might not know that he kind of made his splash as a journalist. His first real big booming entrance onto the stage was in the context of the Second Boer War. And we won't go into what that conflict was all about, but essentially it was the matter of foreign interests and self-determination in South Africa, in modern day South Africa. And, uh, Chesterton had a lot to say about sort of why, for lack of a better way of putting it, nations maybe need to keep their noses out of other nations' business. And this is a remarkable kind of consistency that he has. The basis for patriotism being a love of one's homeland is, in a certain way, logically opposed to the impulse of imperialism in Chesterton's thinking. And he sees a lot of imperialism at work in what's going on in the Boer War, let's say, what's going on in British interests in, at the time, Palestine, China, India. Hong Kong rather than China. But you get the idea that you know if we think that it's about our identity and our identity being important, he says, well, if you grant that as kind of a premise and as a principle, then you should also recognize that the Indian has the same interest in his identity and in his heritage, and so we shouldn't be endeavoring to make India British. We should let India be Indian and let Britain be English. Um, that was kind of the thrust of Chesterton's thoughts. And so, just to give you a first foray into some of this line of argumentation that we're going to be looking at as the year progresses, as we kind of work with this book as a text about, as we work with the whole concept of the United States and our history as a text. And I do have some thematic episodes that I'm sort of planning out, looking at, for example, um, well, I have these two volumes. Let me lean over and grab it from my library shelf, but great volumes from the Library of America. But this is called The Debate Over the Constitution, or The Debate on the Constitution, the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist Discourse at the Founding of Our Country. These are things that I think a lot of us maybe never learned in school, or if we did learn it in school, we only got a passing familiarity with it. And there are some deep, heady issues here when you start to think about what it is that makes a nation what it is, what makes a people what it is, and how we can have a legitimate pride in our own sense of belonging to a people, while at the same time recognizing the fundamental value of solidarity, that we are kind of all in one larger family, certainly in the will of God to be in the church, but even just as members of the human race. So these are some of the topics we're going to be talking about as 2026 continues. And for now, we'll get started with an essay from the Illustrated London News in 1923, and this is called On Neighbors and Nations. And I think I'll just read this and kind of leave you with this. It is often said that patriotism has too much of the swagger and selfishness of private property. The truth is that patriotism would be pretty well put straight and reconciled with other reasonable things if it only had the modesty and moderation of private property. Private property, when decently distributed, does constitute a model example of how different things suited to different people can exist peacefully side by side. The gentleman living at 28 Alexandrovna Road, whose taste is satisfied by having a pea green front door, does not boil with resentment because the gentleman at number 29 prefers to have a peacock green front door. Pea green and peacock green can exist side by side, both owners managing to be as proud as two peacocks without being as like as two peas. There is really no reason why the same should not be true when the front door is a frontier. There is no reason why the same should not be true when the colors are truly colors in the sense of flags. The suburban gentleman already regards his door as a shield in the sense of a defense. There's no reason why he should not regard it as a shield in the sense of an escutcheon. But in order to have escutcheons, it is necessary to have heralds and a system of heraldry, acknowledged by all and apportioning their parts to all. When Mr. Jones selects for his bedroom wallpaper a delicate pattern of purple toads or whatnot, he does not lie awake at night and lament because Mr. Smith, at the other end of the street, prefers to festoon his walls with a lighter tracery of scarlet spiders. Still less would he desire a battle of the toads and spiders, like the battle of the frogs and mice. Still less would he desire that those purple and scarlet monsters dye the street with the hues of sanguinary conflict. That one may sprinkle his walls with spiders and the other with toads, that every man may in reason do as he likes with his own wallpaper or his own front door, is so far from being a merely predatory idea that it is the only workable idea for keeping the peace. And just the same can be seen in the just the same can be seen in the case of nationalism of nations by anybody who really wants to keep the peace. If international relations were reorganized by somebody who really understood the real idea of private property, there would be a chance of men combining peace and patriotism. So that's just the introductory paragraph to this great essay, but I'll include a link to it in the show notes, and I do commend it to your reading because this is kind of this unique and somewhat paradoxical, of course, a lot of witty wordplay involved in there too, but the wonderful perspective that Chesterton brings to these things that, again, I think um, are, if anything, more relevant today, maybe than they were when he penned them. This is in 1923, so it's just after the Great War, but war is sort of never far out of mind throughout that entire decade, with all the unease in the settlement after the war. And he'll mention that a little bit, I think, in this essay, but in other essays that he writes around this time, how we keep getting this wrong because we don't know necessarily how to respect and peacefully maintain our pride in our own interests without kind of imposing upon the interests of others. Is there a counter argument to that? Is there another side? What about the age of evangelization accomplished through, say, the campaigns of discovery into the New World by the conquistadors, for example? Well, we're going to probably talk about all of that as the year progresses because these are sort of the deep waters that we get into when we start to think about things as momentous as the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. This is a great country. I'm very proud to be a son of this nation and to have served in the military for this nation and to have all of the opportunity and privilege that comes along with having been fortunate enough to be born and raised here. But I also appreciate other cultures and nations as well, and I think that we could all do with a little bit more of that in our lives. Having just finished the Olympics, that kind of perspective of the peacefulness with which perhaps nations can interact compared to what we see maybe in the news happening at the same time with respect to discussions between certain nations. It's an interesting contrast to dwell upon and to think upon. So I invite you to continue watching this channel throughout the year as we talk about this and many other things. And to prime you for having some of those discussions, I do encourage you to go to chesterton.org/store. Today, chesterton.org/store. And right under the new releases, you'll find Chesterton's What I Saw in America. Happy reading, and until next time, God bless.